Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. That's it. I understand you and I've read your opinion. Now let me give you my answer. My wedding to Christina is going to happen and very soon, and we both look forward to seeing you at the ceremony and the banquet. Good day. Arthur walked resolutely out of the room to his mother's groaning. Arthur, no. He went out and closed the door behind him tightly, but carefully, without slamming it. Thank you for that. But Wendy was still holding on to her heart, and her husband turned on the television, flicking the remote control aimlessly. Max groaned to his wife again. Will you please turn it off? Well, at least talk to him. It's impossible. Don't you agree? I agree, it's impossible. But from the looks of it, it will be. I talked to him. You heard it yourself. So did his answer. And now what? Will he marry this one? A mother couldn't accept her son's choice. Maybe. So what do we do, tell me? Kill him with her. What do you mean by that? You're suggesting we accept it. Call that mutt a daughter. What are you? We have a French bulldog. Max specifically to pick a wife out of him. He himself was also against this alliance. That is, the marriage of his only son to some girl without lineage, without tribe. That is, it was not a question of lineage or pedigree. She's a pretty girl, all right. But she's poor, from no family. That is, no family at all. Some grandmother brought her up in the country. Arthur, by the way, had a brilliant upbringing. How much blood, sweat, and money did his parents spend on him? Which is also important. And he was no longer a student, not just the son of rich parents. He had his own business. He could have easily found a girl of his own circle to increase his and his parents' capital. But he found this Christina. Now his own wife is lying on the couch crying. Wendy, stop it. Don't worry about it. So of course, I'll talk to him some more. But even if I do, what's the harm? Nobody canceled the divorce. Max, what are you talking about? You think everyone just gets divorced, and that's it. In such marriages, children appear, and even more willingly than in equal marriages. And the reputation is worth something. What 1,000 years are we talking about? Where and in what circles is divorce or children on the side considered something reprehensible? Yes, now it looks ridiculous that someone has been married only once. Stop the hysteria, please. All right, your reputation means nothing to you, but your son's state of mind. What do you say about that? How will he get over it? A bad marriage. Divorce. Clasped my wife's hand stupid. Couldn't stand the price. Barked my husband before me, you can't play the show. Ah, pair. Heartfelt worries. What else do you think? Sin before God. Will he lose money through it? He might. Is that what you're afraid of? So am I. And we both know why. That's what you should be pushing, not metaphysics. That's what I'll talk to the dumbasses about when the thoughtful one cools down with examples from life. Yes, Max knew what he was saying. He had his sins in his youth and in his more mature years, and some of them had come at a price. So he would explain to his son what promiscuity could lead to. Yes, at first glance, it is Christina, angel of heaven. A girl with candy, boxes of sugar lamb. But it's about time you knew that the main danger is just such sheep. That's what you need to warn your son, not about all this nonsense about the breed, which they themselves do not have. And Max had examples, since he was a big walker of the female sex, and still is. But my son told me about it, and not my wife. Although Wendy guessed something, there was no hiding the presence of a child out of wedlock. That goes without saying. And a few other things. But that's all right. I've sorted it out as best I can. Now we have to start all over again. Already a son. And health is no longer the same. Oh, Arthur. Arthur is such a smart guy. Prudent, calculating, strong-willed. I wish I had known that this will turn against my parents. Arthur secluded himself in his room, really trying to cool down after his conversation with his parents. Yes, he knew they had a certain snobbishness about them. He understood that they might accept the bride without enthusiasm, but not that much. He couldn't not bring home his sweetheart and introduce her to his parents. Oh, he would have known what a mess that would be. Wouldn't have done it. Then, after the wedding, he would have presented the fact. Married. Here's my lawful wedded wife. Please love and respect. Or you wouldn't introduce them at all. Why do some people do that? After all, he's an independent adult. He has his own stable income and can live separately as a married man. But who would have thought that Christina wouldn't like him? And most importantly, with what? Yes, she is an orphan and grew up with her grandmother in the country. And that it's rather a plus. She came to the city without any connections and protection, has a good education. She looks great, keeps herself on course, manners, sense of style impeccable, and honestly does not invent anything, does not pretend to be a count's daughter. Yes, she has no money. So what? Today she has no money, but tomorrow she may have more than they have. Or are they unhappy that he just decided to get married? Well, at 26 it's about time. They shouldn't have done it the way they wanted. The dating thing. They just embarrassed themselves and compared him. And they hurt the girl too. Though I have to give them credit, they tried to keep up the good work. The table was set for the guests. They behaved well. They did not show their boorish attitude. But that is smart. I understood everything. I smelled my mother's spikes. And sometimes, almost outright mockery from my father. Yesterday, when Arthur took her home, after that evening, with a tired sneer, she said, "I don't seem to be in the right place." I had to stop the car and convince her that she was not marrying his parents but him. He needed, and loved her, and she was good for his heart and soul. But still, her parents' opinion. What does that mean? What if you fight with them now because of me, and in a few years you'll realize that you've hurt my mom and dad, and it will turn into negativity in my direction? You can have as many wives as you want. The parents are alone. Christina, don't please. First of all, I assure you, I'm not going to fight with anyone. And secondly, well, tell me, what makes you think they have anything against you? Yes, it's the first meeting. It's understandable prejudice. They don't know what to expect from you yet, and I don't know what they're afraid of. And just in case, they're expecting something bad. All right, at least we're not going to have a good fight. I'm not going to ingratiate myself to your parents. Try to show my best side. I am who I am. You're great, and I'll always be on your side, no matter what happens. And the fact that I'm only going to have one wife is also undeniable. Yes, she and Christina are fine. No one will ever separate them. If in order to be with her, they have to separate from their parents, what is Arthur prepared to do about it? After all, father and mother will forever be them. There will be no others, nor will they have another son. Then there was a knock on the door, and his father came into the room. Well, has the rebel calmed down? In a checking tone, he asked. I wasn't nervous. It's all right. Dad, I think you're worried about Mom. I just don't understand why. Everything seems fine, and you should have been rude to get into a pose. My mother cries because she has hypertension. By the way, what is there to cry about? What is the tragedy? I decided to run away with the gypsy, get together with a married lady of many children 20 years older. What's the matter? Arthur really sincerely did not understand. At first glance, nothing at all. Lovely girl, you're Christina. I envy her. It is on the outside. You cannot even say that she is some kind of provincial. But what is there really? You say my acquaintance is only a few months old, but you knew even at first sight that she is a miracle. The son exclaimed. Yes, I did. And why a miracle? How old is she? 22. 23 years old. And how has she lived since she was 18? How did she come from the countryside and become so important on her own? Or did someone help her? Did her father raise an eyebrow? Here we go. I'm not going to listen to insults about my fiancé. If you don't like it yourself, yes, I know, but you go with her out of the house and you don't want to know us anymore. Max continued for him. You're right. Just think about it. How long will it last? I've suffered a lot in my life because of women, you know. Their greed, their desire not to make their own lives better, but to ruin the lives of others. It's not about Christina. The son answered sharply. Are you sure? I would still advise you to be more careful. Try checking her out, my father advised. That's all you need. Arthur brushed it aside. Why not? You do not with her walk. Are you going to tie your life together in front of the moon? I trust her, Dad, and she trusts me. It's not like she's going to test me. We know everything there is to know about each other. Arthur was completely convinced of what he was saying, but his father had a different opinion. You're sure? What if she already knows a lot more than you think about the state of your bank accounts, the affairs of your firm, everything, including childhood illnesses, the girl you first kissed in the 5th grade? Arthur laughed. Daddy, I'm sorry, but that's paranoid. Well, look, but still take my words to heart. But believe me, finally, I've lived my life and seen things, and I wish you only good things. I'll be happy first, if everything goes well with you and Christina. Okay, you don't want to hear about what happened in my life. It's like it was a long time ago, and it's not true. But you look at your fellows. They didn't have all sorts of incidents of different severity. Max said without any pressure, just tired. And the sad thing is that it affected his son the most. His father had already left, and Arthur sat there, digesting the conversation. Yes, he trusted Christina completely. She had never lied, never concealed anything from him, and he had never had a single reason to doubt his beloved. But he trusted his father too, and Dad obviously wished only the best for his son. There was certainly no doubt about that. And yes, Max had a lot of experience, and not only in dealing with women. He was not going to get into his father's secrets, but his words about the incidents that had happened to Arthur's friends struck a chord with him. There were stories among his peers that cost them a lot of nerve and admittedly money. And since Arthur rotated mainly in his notorious circle, his acquaintances were mostly the children of very poor parents. What is surprising, then, that many suffered in one way or another from the treachery of women. And okay in his early youth, when he was young and inexperienced, but even now his peers sometimes fell into honey traps. I remembered Greg's pale, swollen face, which had recently gone on a multi-day binge. After a collapse of love like that, I loved her. Can you believe it? No, for real. Forever, you know. I gave my soul to her. I never wrote a poem. And then I sat up all night and came up with a wreath of sonnets. And it turns out she didn't want a soul or sonnets. She wanted money. What did she need, you ask? To support her lover. He was in prison for assaulting her, so he needs visitation passes. Lawyers, so he can get out early and get her ass kicked in the face for locking him up. And I'm her wreath of sonnets. I published a book with her picture in it. I cried to Greg, a picture of this bitch. Arthur saw really pretty. The eyes are honest too, wildly involved in such an ugly story. Or another comrade, William Togo, often seen in the company of such a beauty that cannot describe. Not only that the beauty is so intelligent, educated a mile away, it is clear that the noble blood. Sama and wrote poems and played the piano to what just did not do. And it turned out that in the past to be spoiled, then rose to the elite concubine, had already robbed a few rich people of their money. And William was one of them. And he didn't revel in the money either, but that he couldn't find another woman like that. He should have crossed his left heel that he wouldn't find one. He did. Don't you know what kind of woman she is? I'd do anything to rob and kill, just to be with her. Stop. What am I doing? Who am I comparing her to? And what do I suspect her of? You must be out of your mind. And who am I listening to? My father, who made up all sorts of things to dissuade me from getting married. To whose examples, guided by cronies who were not clever enough to see the princesses of their monsters. But Christina is mine, different. She's of a different kind. Although, you see, everyone probably thinks so. No, Christina just isn't capable of anything like that. I'm not going to test her. It wouldn't even occur to me. I just want to prove to those around me how honest and unselfish this girl is. It won't be a test. It will be proof. Maybe by finding out the whole truth, my parents will change their attitude. And he decided to prove it in a rather innocuous way. During another meeting, when their wedding day was less than a week away, Christina told him that she had to travel a lot for work, inspections, to spend time at various venues. She was assigned a chauffeur-driven car for that, but so unsuccessfully that she still has to order a cab quite often. The car broke down, or the driver didn't show up, and so for 3 or even 5 times a day have to go from cab to cab. I'm sick of it. So, Christina, you have a license, right? I do have a license. I told you my uncle was a driving instructor. He was. I was 20 years old, so he taught me how to drive. And I passed my license the first time. But I'm sorry, I haven't bought a car yet, grinned the girl. And that wasn't some kind of hint. Danny had never asked him for anything. In fact, she refused to accept gifts that were too expensive. Even at the beginning of their relationship, he had tried to give her a golden bracelet, and in doing so, he had only offended her. She had to ask for forgiveness. I'm not your relative and not your lover. I understand flowers, or, say, invite you to a cafe. But why the gold? Certainly not. He'd never hint to her that he could give her a car. But a loner would. Well, if you have the right, let me give you power of attorney for my new one and drive it. You trust me. Aren't you afraid that you scratched it? Not a bit afraid, Arthur answered. I am much more afraid that we will not be able to meet because you are tired, and that another cab driver may turn out to be a maniac, a murderer, and take you to the unknown. Christina agreed, and the next day she went about her business in Arthur's car, unaware that he had installed a hidden video camera there. He could see the footage immediately on his smartphone. Arthur was trying to justify to himself his worries and the girl's anxiety mania, and the fact that from the beginning he was still worried about showing the cameras something he didn't like very much. He was hiding things from himself. The first day was nothing special. One drove around on business, didn't take any hitchhikers, only talked to him and Arthur on the phone for work. So there were no surprises. The young man was already beginning to feel ashamed of what he had arranged and was ready to take off the camera and apologize, or not to say anything, but still decided to wait a couple more days. And the next day, he saw something he really didn't like. This time, the trip was clearly not a business day. Drove up to some house, stopped, got out of the cabin, and began to wait. Soon there was a man who could not be imagined as anything other than a lover. A very poorly dressed man. But the cinema was very pleased by his appearance. She approached, embraced the man. They stood there, as if looking at each other fondly. Anyone who did not know Christina might have thought he was her father. But Arthur knew there was no father, and it was unlikely that this man, obviously well beaten by life, could be her kinsman. But who then? Why such joy at meeting her, and why such an embrace? The couple got into the car and drove off somewhere. Arthur, dropping everything, quickly followed, hoping he would see something that would reassure him. What could it be? He was lost in speculation. Luckily for him, Diana's path wasn't that far away. Wendy parked the car in a deserted spot. Arthur decided not to be distracted by watching the camera, but to see for himself what was going on inside his car. Without further ado, he quickly approached the car and opened the door. His lover was sitting next to the man, and they were just talking, holding hands. Tears glistened in Christina's eyes. The unexpected appearance of her fiancé embarrassed her. She did not even immediately find something to say. The man also sat silently, looking at Arthur in surprise. "Ah, Arthur." At last she said, "I want you to meet him. This is my fiancé. That's him I'm going to marry. His name is Arthur. Nice to meet you. When did you adopt her? It seems that a few days ago you didn't have a father." The young man said indignantly, but Christina had recovered her senses and was now in control. "Sit down, please, Arthur. I see you decided to hunt me down. I wonder what you wanted to see." "Wait, daughter, it's clear. He's jealous because he loves you." "Calm down, kid. I really am her father, but I adopted her right after she was born. And I'm sorry, I spent the last years in prison. I mean in juvie. Obviously, I was ashamed to admit it, so she hid the fact that she had such a relative. And then, as luck would have it, I was released a little early. That's how it happened. Here's your parole certificate and other documents. We'll take a look if you don't believe me. Why would you be ashamed of me?" But he's not going to give up completely. "Isn't that right, daughter?" "Yes, Dad. I'll never give up on you." "Arthur, what do you want now?" "My mom's really dead, Dad." "Here he is. And he's not going to do anything to stop us. But I can't let him out of my life either. I will, as much as I can help him. Thank you alone." "That's all I expected from you," my father said. "Well, all right, I agree," said the prestigious Arthur. "Sorry, one thought God knows what, not on purpose, honestly. I don't know what got into my head all of a sudden. And I don't know why you had to hide it, how it could affect the way I feel about you. I love you, so I must accept your family too. I invite you to our wedding. Andrew, it's the day after tomorrow, and I understand that you may have some problems, but I'll give you the money to go to the hair salon and for a suit. Or if you don't have time to buy one, you can borrow one of mine. We have almost identical figures, you and I." "Thank you, Arthur," said Christina. "Don't you worry. You don't need any money. I can help my father with it myself, and I'll be very happy for Dad to see you at his wedding." "That's fine. You don't have to worry. I won't ruin your wedding. I'm not even going to the registry office. Just sign without me being there. I'll stop by the restaurant, congratulate you, and sit somewhere quietly in the corner. I understand that the groom's parents, with my appearance, even if they don't know my biography, will simply begin to annoy me, no matter what suit I'm dressed up in." Now it was Arthur's turn to agonize. "Well, my parents won't have anything against it. They will be glad to meet you," he muttered, realizing what untruths Christina spoke. She understood that too. And she even questioned whether her future mother-in-laws would come to the wedding. Turns out they would come after all. Had they really come to terms with their son's choice? She didn't know whether to be happy or sad. Deep down, Christina would have been happy to have a wedding without any parents at all. She was not so much afraid of what her father would do or say wrong. She was sure nothing of the sort would happen. But her mother-in-law might not openly disrupt their marriage. But it's possible that they'll make some sarcastic remarks. And even if they just sit there with a disgruntled look, it would already seriously spoil her mood. But the girl was well aware that she could not do without her parents, and Arthur would not agree to hold a wedding without them. And a lot of people around her would not understand. So what would she put up with? There is nothing wrong with not being loved by your beloved's parents. The father, on the other hand, would probably behave himself. And so the day of the wedding came. There were not many guests, only the bridegroom's close friends and the parents of the bride. The ceremony at the wedding palace was quite successful. Max and Wendy may not have been radiant with joy, but they did not show much grief over their son's wedding either. Arthur talked to them and explained what a wonderful girl Christina is. He believes her 100% and believes that her father and mother will also love her soon. So there is no need to spoil the relationship. Understand, we're not going to be together for 3 days or 3 years. We're going to be together all our lives, which means let's live peacefully and amicably together with you. But what choice do we have? Wendy sighed. Of course, let's not spoil our holiday. Okay, son, what are you worried about? His father reassured him. Everything will be all right. We have nothing against your bride. After the ceremonial registration, the young husband and wife were congratulated, and everyone moved together to the restaurant. Christina looked around anxiously. She had not yet seen her father, and she was to introduce him to her new relatives. The banquet hall was not the largest, but not a small one either. Eden was well aware that her father would not want to sit with anyone else, but separately. And the table for that was not far from the young people, but without unnecessary company. She doubted that he would make a successful match with her mother-in-law right away. But now, at last, he appeared, admired her daughter, who was unusually suited to her bridal attire. He looked around the hall. He went to his seat. Later, he took a chair, but then his eyes fell on his son-in-law's parents, and Andrew froze in shock. The fact was that he knew these people well, and he knew them not in a good way. It was thanks to Arthur's father that he had once been imprisoned, and completely without guilt. But of course he was not going to have a showdown at his daughter's wedding, so he quickly pulled himself together, pulled back his chair, sat down at the table, and realized that he could not feign serene joy. Heavy memories came flooding back, sending him into an initially joyful mood. Once almost 30 years ago, he was a young man, newly married, working as a chauffeur in a wealthy family. Andrew's job was more than satisfying. He was paid a decent wage and was treated as an attendant. The owners were both husband and wife. Fine. Everything was fine until one day the owner was found dead in his car. And it was he, Andrew, who found him. He became the prime suspect and then the defendant. And that's even though there was no evidence against him. There wasn't at first, because in the course of the trial, the unhappy widow began to give the strangest testimony against Andrew. She flooded them with tears, stated that the driver had repeatedly made indecent suggestions to her, which she eventually complained to her husband. Because of this, the driver and the owner had a serious conflict. She was confirmed by a family friend who said that he had witnessed the conflict and that the driver had made threats. Andrew, however, had no evidence and no proof of his innocence, as a result of which he was sentenced to 15 years. Only his young wife believed him, who did not abandon her husband, supported him, wrote letters, came to see him. Thanks to this, Christina was born. But she could not fight for his acquittal. She lacked knowledge and experience, and most importantly, money. On another date, she told me that the widow of the murdered man had soon married the very family friend who had corroborated her testimony. If there was a savvy lawyer, he could, on this basis, prove Andrew's innocence. But where to get one? And then, when Andrew's daughter was not yet in school, her mother died. Christina did not end up in an orphanage only thanks to her grandmother, who raised the little girl all these years alone. Andrew, when he got out of prison, saw his daughter as a teenager and wanted to start an honest life. But where could he find a job for a man who had served time under such an article? It was very difficult, and he so wanted to help his daughter. And as a result, out of despair, he soon went back to prison. But it was a much lighter sentence, just 5 years. And now he's out. He could hardly find his daughter. Was so happy that she was doing well, that she was getting married. And now it turns out that Christina will become a member of the family of the people who had so crippled her father's life. And not everything is about their lives themselves. Okay, Andrew as an adult learned a lot of interesting things about Max and Wendy. It turns out that the groom's father also recognized his longtime foe, and he did not even think to feel guilt for the man in whose life he had played such a terrible role. On the contrary, he decided to eliminate him from his family's life, so that some secrets would never come out. Perhaps this would help get rid of an unwanted daughter-in-law. Thinking about this, when he saw Andrew, he grinned predatorily and approached the microphone. Dear guests, I want to inform you that today we have a double celebration. Well, first, the wedding of my son, and second, the release from prison of my father, the fiancé of my esteemed matchmaker. Let's give a round of applause to a man who has been tried twice, served almost 20 years in prison, including for murder. But he did not break down. He felt fine, and even declared everything for his daughter's wedding, without spending a penny. This was totally unexpected for everyone. Some of the guests clapped their hands in confusion, and the rest sat there not knowing how to react to such a demarche. It wasn't that Andrew was confused. He was almost killed by his relative's speech. After all, it was his fault he went to prison. And now the man who was most likely responsible for the murder was so blatantly shaming him in front of the whole world. But he did not want to say it aloud, so as not to spoil his daughter's party. He didn't even try to go to the microphone. He stood up, bowed to the guests, approached the bride, kissed her on the cheek. "I'm sorry, daughter. I didn't know whose son you were marrying, but you don't know that yourself either." He turned to Arthur. "Do you even know you are not the natural son of those two? They adopted you as a baby for your father's inheritance, which they killed together, and they framed me. So you keep that in mind. And be happy anyway. You're not responsible for the sins of your parents, either your own or your adoptive parents." And with that he left. The bride and groom stood at a loss, looking at each other. Arthur was the first to come to his senses. "Christina, let's not try to figure things out right now. Let this day be the happiest of our lives, and we'll deal with the rest later. I really didn't know anything, and neither do you, I suppose." After that, the wedding itself went a little differently. Max tried to approach his son and start a conversation with him. Wendy generally cited ill health and left. The bride cried. Somehow the celebration was brought to a conclusion. The young couple did not go to the fancy home of the groom and his parents, but to a hotel where they decided to spend their wedding night and calm down a little after what had happened. In fact, they didn't even realize what had actually happened. And at Arthur's house, the fight between his parents was in full swing. "Idiot," shouted Wendy. "But what was it worth listening to me for once in my life? My heart was just telling me that this whole wedding thing was not good. It's Christina. Where did she come from? How could I have prevented this? But you cried like a fool. Divorce is not a reputation issue. Bullshit. Let them get married. So much for getting married. And going to jail isn't a problem for you. What, prison? Isn't it enough? All the sentences are long gone. That lousy inmate won't prove anything. He'll start talking too much. He'll end up back where he came from. I don't care if he turns out to be anything. Is that what I mean? For a quarter of a century, everything was perfect. And there you have it. Whether he proves it or not, he told them everything. What happens now? What do you think is gonna happen? Nothing will happen. Arthur, are you an idiot? Believing the chatter of some prisoner, that's not the least of what he's done wrong. And if he does, so what? Wendy took the pills. She lay down in the bedroom, but could not calm down. Before her eyes passed all the complex twists and turns of her confused life, and how well everything had worked out for her at first. In her early youth, she managed to marry a very promising young man, a prominent businessman. She became a rich woman. She lived the life that many people never dream of. And then her husband had a mistress, and not just for fun, but for love. So he and Wendy decided to divorce her. She tried everything she could to avoid it. She threatened to kill herself, and all sorts of terrible things she'd done to her husband and his girlfriend. But no, he was firm in his decision. Apparently, love really did happen. What's more, the bitch decided to have a baby with him. That is, to do what Wendy could not do. It threatened to lose everything, which the woman could not accept. The final divorce and marriage to an already deeply pregnant mistress was put off by her husband because the mistress had some problems with her pregnancy. She was constantly in and out of hospitals, which is reassuring. Maybe there would be no baby at all, and by the same token the separation itself. Not only that the baby came, but her husband also immediately adopted him and rewrote his will all, leaving the newborn baby, and therefore his mother. Action had to be taken immediately, before the divorce was finalized. Fortunately, the husband had a partner and a longtime foe of his, this very Max. With him, Wendy conspired, and he managed to eliminate her husband, diverting all suspicion from himself and putting another man chauffeur. It couldn't have been better. Things were going well with the mistress too. Wendy had never recovered from childbirth and was still in the hospital. And when she learned that her lover had died before he could propose to her, she died too, either from a heart attack or something else. Thanks to a few rather large bribes, they were able to quickly conclude a marriage with Max and adopt an heir, that is Arthur. And everything, it would seem, life is good, becoming the legal parents of a tiny millionaire. They have access to his money and not bad rise themselves. And everything would have been fine if it were not for that unfortunate Christina, whom no other than the devil himself had slipped Arthur. How could this have happened? Max walked quietly into the room and sat down with his wife. There had been no love lost between them to begin with, but they needed each other. Besides, they shared a dark secret, more than one. And the thread? He said softly, "Calm down, darling. Nothing terrible has happened. Arthur will come. We'll talk to him, find out how he feels. Maybe he didn't even think to believe this criminal. And even if he did, we can explain everything without going into detail. Let's think about what we'll say if anything happens. After all, my dear, do you really care that much about his opinion? Well, let's say he refuses us, that we've already got everything we need. And if we want, we'll get the rest. Or do you have maternal feelings?" "Yeah, to hell with feelings." Wendy brushed it off. "It's not about feelings, Max. It's that life has really gone downhill. I mean, divorce and illegitimate children and all that stuff, it's not a big deal. But if word gets out about our past, who cares? Will it be proven or not? The rumors will stay. That's it. Our reputation's ruined. People will be ashamed to see us. Yeah, come on. We've been through worse than this. And if Arthur gets his tail in a twist, we'll get away with it. Don't be frightened. Nobody is going to kill him. There are better ways than that. What do you say we take over his business?" "That sounds good to me. Would you be able to arrange that?" Wendy asked pitifully. "And when and what didn't you arrange?" "No. Okay, I couldn't stop the wedding. But that's where the subtle matters of so-called love came in. Unfortunately, in this I really do not particularly competent, but in business quite. So do not doubt. Not with the wall I will not. If anything, neither will I." And they didn't have to explain themselves. No one demanded an explanation. Arthur and his young wife arrived at his parents' house only a few days later. He immediately announced that he was going to get his things. Sorry, so-called parents. But in these days I found out that Christina's father was right. I am an adopted son. I can't say that you were such a worthless father and mother, but still, you are not my parents, and there are still some unpleasant things about our kinship. So Christina and I will live separately. After all, we don't depend on each other. I have my own business, my own affairs, and I hope that we won't have any problems with each other. And I don't want to dig too deeply into the past, simply because I don't hope to find answers to all the questions, of which there are plenty. Okay, I won't deny it. Are you really adopted?" Max answered calmly. "That we've been hiding it. That's understandable. But the rest? Do you really believe the drunken ravings of this criminal, your father-in-law? And are you really ready to spit on your mother and me?" "I don't spit on anybody. I just want to live separately. I'm a grown-up married man. Besides, I know we're not going to be able to live together anymore." Wendy tried to act tragic and began the usual wringing of her hands and wailing about her ungrateful son. But realizing that the performance would not be appreciated, she stopped it. "You should still be grateful to us," she said, deciding to reserve the last word. "And you may well regret what you said and come to us for help. And you will be, I hope, ashamed, because we will not be remembered for evil." Max preferred to refrain from all scenes at all, and only shrugged his shoulders at his son's words. He felt it was pointless to conclude Arthur. There was no point, and considered it best to leave it as it was, at least as long as he had his own ideas about what to do next. He was not going to tell anyone about them just yet. When Arthur and Christina coldly, "Excuse me," left, Max went into his wife's room. She paced from corner to corner, unable to suppress her rage. Everything is all right, as you can see, including our reputation. That fool decided not to dig any further and just left home like all normal people who lives with their parents nowadays. Everybody gets married and goes off to the big time. It worked out exactly the same way for us. I mean, it's okay. And stop getting worked up. I know exactly how I'm going to show him that you have to listen to your parents a little bit. Yeah, Max does what he sets out to do. I'd like him to be completely broke, you know, to have nothing left, to come crawling on his knees and begging for bread. And so it will be, my dear, almost sang Max. Arthur went to work in his honeymoon 2 weeks ago. Things in his company were always going well, so he was not worried about something bad happening without him. And all was indeed well. The manager introduced him to a new supplier, a man who was reliable and very helpful to the business. At least it seemed so. How was he to know that his adoptive father Max had put him up to this man? This supplier was indeed an experienced and knowledgeable man, but not in the supply business. He was embedded in the company in order to ruin it. In this he was unrivaled. His intrigue was clever and stealthy. For a long time, no one could understand why things were getting worse every day. Things were getting worse and worse. Only a few months later, the firm was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Arthur realized that it would probably not be possible to get out of this situation. Serious cash injections were needed, and he almost had no money. Going to ask his father, he might have had the money. But Arthur didn't even think about it. Even realizing that he would most likely have to give up his business, he had no intention of going to Max. Moreover, he began to suspect that he might have played a role in the collapse of the firm. It was a very difficult period. The young businessman found comfort only at home with Christina, who supported him in everything and comforted him, assuring him that they would not be lost in any case. Arthur, yes, maybe really give it all up. I can't watch and get fired up about this company. And what are we going to live on? We were going to buy a house, and now we have nothing to pay the rent next month. But listen, if everything goes on your firm, you won't be able to pay anyway. I'm just begging you, don't go into debt. I've heard that they advise you to take out a loan, and not a small one at that. It's very dangerous. I agree with you. I'm not going to take out any loans, but what are you going to do? If you agree to give it all up, we could move to the country. My grandfather's house there is quite sturdy and livable. Not the kind you're used to, of course. But what can we do? We'll work and slowly bring everything back to normal. These days, many people turn country houses into such a pretty thing that any mansion would be jealous of. Believe, Christina, but you have to know how to do it all. And I'm a city man. I have no idea what it takes in a country house to be at least livable. The roof leaks, and I have no idea how to fix it. And I can't even get the stove to melt. You'll learn, Arthur. It's not such a hard science. Besides, we'll take my father with us. There's nothing for him to do in town anyway. Can't find a steady job. They get sick all the time. And he grew up in the country, and his hands always grew out of the right place. So, they thought about it, pondered, had doubts. They called Andrew to the council. He was thrilled with the idea. For a long time, he had dreamed of moving to the country, but he did not dare. There is nothing to do there alone. And with a young family, not everyone can. We moved to the country. Arthur sold his luxury foreign car, and many other things he did not need. There was money for all sorts of farm implements. It was possible to begin to live, to arrange his life, to start a farm. And then Christina announced that she was expecting a baby, and the joy of her men could not end. The adoptive parents were also happy when they found out that their son was broke. They were waiting for him to come to ask for mercy because he and his young wife had simply nowhere to live, so there was nowhere to go. Of course they would. Wendy skillfully rehearses for himself, angrily reproaching his adopted son that he did not appreciate his parents, did not listen, are not native, you did not need us. And as soon as you pressed your tail, you hopped in and brought your mongrel. And who told you we'd take you in after all the insults you've heard? After the way you spit in our souls? Get out of here and go ask your father-in-law, the warrant officer, the criminal, for help. Maybe he'll take you in. I don't know where he lives in the bum's house. Maybe there's a place for you there too. But these speeches remained unrequited. Arthur never came for help. But Max, coming home one day, happily told his wife, "Heard the news about our son. You'll laugh a little bit about our son." But they moved to the village. It turned out that our beautiful bride has a hut on chicken legs. That's where they moved. Really? Tell me, what a proud man who never came to bow to us. Well, what's his business? It's all right. He'll live there, twist cows' tails, and go back to town. How long will he last? He won't live in the country. It's better if he doesn't come back. I can't imagine what he'll get up to in that village. He'll drink himself to death in some clearing or whatever they eat. It's not like they took that criminal with them. Can you imagine what they'll get up to? The spouses were having as much fun as kids, making assumptions about the further degradation of someone who for years had been considered their son. They had no sympathy for Arthur, much less for Christina and their possible children. They prophesied all sorts of troubles, and the young ones never got to anything. They may not have lived richly or easily, but they lived together and with hope for the best. Andrew was happy, having returned to his roots. Christina, too, was used to everything. And even Arthur rather quickly got into a taste for it. He enthusiastically took care of the household under the guidance of his father-in-law. Everything was going great, although the lack of money often affected. Arthur realized that the only thing they could hope for was a good harvest. It was a good harvest. Selling it would bring them at least some income. His father-in-law, it turned out, had another dream, not entirely realistic, as he himself realized, but still. During the last time I was in prison, he told me, I met a grandfather. He was already in good years, and he was sick too. All my life in jail, you know. And so he told me, as if in gratitude for a favor, his secret. When he was on the outside, he robbed a jewelry store. There was quite a lot of goods there, but he didn't have time to use any of them. He was caught, but he had time to hide it in a secret place. And he told me about this place not so far from us in an abandoned village. He had a feeling he wouldn't go free. What good would go to waste? He had no kin. He was a loner all his life. So he told me, knowing he was going to die soon. And that's how it turned out. They kept him there. So I thought I'd go check it out. I remembered the landmarks well. If there's anything, I'll find it. You still believe in miracles, don't you? Do you really think it's true? I'm sorry, but at your age, what kind of pirate treasure hunt? Christina was waving him off. I agree. The probability is almost zero. But I'm very worried about it almost. What if it doesn't look like the old man was on the make-believe? And why would he lie? I wonder, on the brink of death. Well, no one forbids going to see it after all, especially if the villages are abandoned. Nothing will happen to you there. It's just a waste of time. What time? It's not like I'm going to wake up a year. I'll go out and have a look. There's nothing. I'll go back to the village for a day or two, but 3 as a last resort. Nothing will happen to you here without me. And he went for a long time, without thinking. No one knows whether he really wanted to or just wanted to take a walk in his native land. After all, was born and grew up here. I was born and grew up here. I reached an abandoned village and found a deserted street. Apparently, this was what he needed. That is, he still had to get into the basement, which in itself was not entirely safe. The house was barely standing as it was. With all due care, Andrew opened the door, entered, and was surprised to realize that the house was inhabited. There was a boy about 7 years old lurking in the corner. "What are you doing here?" he asked in amazement. "I live here. What do you want?" The boy answered defiantly. "I came to see what kind of Mowgli is here. And you? All alone? Where are your parents?" "I don't know, and I don't want to know." I don't have any parents. I ran away from the orphanage. And if you want to send me back there, you'd better get out of here. I'll stay here. So how do you live? Alone. What do you eat? What do you have to? The boy answered, and suddenly he cried out. You could see he was hungry. Besides, he was just a little boy, and his impertinence was a defensive reaction. Apparently, more than once he had to put up with all kinds of insults, especially in the orphanage. Now, come on, get out of here quietly. I have something to eat with me too. Come with me, not to the orphanage. Don't be afraid. I'll take you to my place, and you'll live with me. What's your name? John. John, the little man answered in a respectable way. That's good. And I'm Uncle Andrew. That's how we met. How will you go with me now? You can't live here all by yourself. Your old lady won't mind. The boy hesitated. I ain't got no old lady. I have a daughter who's all grown up. She's got a good husband. We live in threes, and now we'll be fours together with you. Don't worry, we'll be fine. Better than here. All right. If you're not kidding, let's go. The boy agreed. Here's your food and wait for me outside. I'm going down to the basement to do some business. There's nothing down there. I've been down there. Some cans. It's all rotted away. I'll take a look. I'm not interested in the cans. He didn't find any treasure, of course. Maybe it never existed, or had someone stumbled on it before. That is, the one he expected to find. But he found a boy who was in great need of adults, and Andrew didn't mind taking care of the child at all. After all, he had never had to watch his daughter grow up in his life. But what would happen now? Either a son or a grandchild. That's what he said when he came home. Well, young people, meet me. Here's my treasure of gold, John's name. He told me how he found this boy instead of the treasure. You see, no one would let me adopt him. Old single, unmarried and incarcerated. They don't trust kids like that. So you'll have to adopt. But don't worry, I'll take care of him. I can take care of myself. John sulked. He really turned out to be a warehouse independent, serious, not refusing any work. On the contrary, wanting to help everyone. And you did not succeed in everything you took on. And if you were not able to do something, you learned with pleasure. Arthur and Christina were able to arrange the adoption, even though it cost money. After all, they had to get the documents for the boy first. He turned out to be 8 years old, but we had to get him into first grade. He almost never went to school in the orphanage. In spite of all the difficulties, the house was starting to look more and more lived in and even comfortable. And then it turned out that Arthur's foster parents went bankrupt after all. It was thanks to the same supplier, through which they managed to ruin their son's firm. This one, by all appearances, had gotten a taste for it and decided that he was cheaper. He carried out his employer's assignment. That yes, they paid him as they had agreed, but they got many times more than they had bargained for. And so he decided to restore justice in a peculiar way. He started to withdraw the money from Max's accounts. And he got mad. Firstly, he was more experienced than his son. And secondly, he was aware of who he was dealing with. Yes, he realized. Max, not immediately, but having realized, he decided not to leave the theft unpunished and reported it to the police. The swindler was detained, but he did not think to keep quiet, and at the first interrogations began to tell all about the machinations of Max himself. Along the way, his other dishonest deeds began to surface. The two swindlers sold each other out during cross-examinations. As a result, they were both put on trial. Arthur participated in the process as a witness, a victim. And as a result, he managed to get some of the money back. Not all of it, of course. Most of it went to offshore companies, but what was left was very, very important. After all, during the time of the trial, a daughter was born to the young family. Despite the fact that after their wedding, Arthur no longer felt any feelings towards his foster parents, Wendy's fate still worried him. She wasn't on trial, but she was left all alone, with no money and no income. He even thought of doing something to help her. But as it turned out, there was no need. No matter how much she cried and fainted in court, she was left with nothing. And it turned out she had her own capital separate from her husband, and no small. Besides, when she smelled something fried, she managed to re-register something to herself and to hide something. So when the former son approached her with sympathy and offered to help her, he received such an angry rebuke that he went away with a sigh of relief. Don't be saddened, but happy that he will no longer have anything to do with this couple. When he arrived home and told his real family how the case had been resolved, he only shook his head. I must have been in such a passive nest. It turns out I had lived since birth, and I loved those two, thought of them as father and mother. One consolation: I had nothing to do with them. Genetically, I hope, bad, and I have no heredity. Yeah, heredity's bullshit. We don't know what the parents of your adoptive parents were like. It may well be that decent people, or John's parents, by all appearances, are not angels. And the guy is growing up to be the envy of everyone. So the main thing is to be a man yourself, Andrew said his opinion. The whole family, even when they got decent money, would not move to the city. There was nothing to keep them there. Arthur and Christina decided to buy the old farm and invest in its reconstruction. And in time, the fame of their products went even beyond the state.